of us, a
Sorry,
lot
go
of
ahead.
us,
Mhm.
a lot of us come at this from the same place, which is that we are citizens that are frustrated about what we see in terms of our democracy, in terms of how our government is working, how our elections are taking place. And that's something that I was concerned deeply about even before I became a member of Congress. This is something where, I look at this from that lens of just, you know, what would I like to see my representatives, my senators, my president, and others spending their time on? How is it that we can try to make sure that we're putting the focus where it needs to be? But the problem is that the dark money and the big money in our politics, it has corroded and corrupted the system. It is something that is now fundamentally eating away and eroding a lot of the structures and the institutions that our founding fathers and those before us have set up to be able to give us the best representation possible. We've gotten to a point where we basically are in a nonstop election feeling, this system where it just doesn't stop. And it becomes this place where it feels like just elections and the campaign becomes the purpose for this all rather than what it should be on, which is the governance. This was always supposed to be something where we go through the campaign, we elect who we want to govern, and then they govern and they do that work and they try to implement it as best as we can. And then the citizens decide whether or not they're doing a good job. But we've gotten to a point where that kind of breakdown doesn't occur and everything has blurred into each other and everything has become, as I said, just this nonstop campaign that is fueled by money, and it has become this kind of arms race between the parties that isn't going to stop. It's not going to get better. And every time we think that, oh, there's no possible way that the next election is going to be even more money spent than the previous one, we see that blown out of the water, as the graphics that Marie indicated show. So this has gotten out of control. It's something that is so out of line with what our governments should look like, and it's having huge amounts of impact. It's having impacts, as mentioned, in terms of the focus of legislators and lawmakers. Making sure that me and others, we should be spending our time laser focused on getting legislation through and our government work. And if this is at all impeding that, then that is a detriment to our democracy. It also has effects in terms of influence, and we see the special influence, the lobbyists and others, people being able to cut to the front of the line for meetings and for getting to the ear of lawmakers and people in power. That is a huge problem. But the third thing is something that I wanted to share, and some of you heard me talk about this because I experienced it very personally when I was thinking about running for Congress to start with, is that the big money in our politics and the corrupted system that we have and just the nonstop fighting and the vitriol in our system. This also fundamentally affects not just how much money is in our politics and who gets the ear of powerful people, but it also fundamentally affects the kind of people that end up running for office to start with. And that's something I didn't fully understand until I actually went through it. And I saw how, for me, who was a career government official before and never earned a six-figure salary, how people just didn't assume I could have any shot at winning this. They didn't. That the system was so against folks that come from different backgrounds, and it prioritizes and emphasizes people that either themselves have deep pockets or have deep pocketed networks. And as a result, we see the kind of government we have. We see the kind of connections and the influence that is baked into that system. It's gotten out of control. And we need to make sure we're addressing this. I'd like to emphasize what was said in that first slide, which is that this needs to and should be a nonpartisan issue. This is an issue that gets at the heart of our democracy. I get it. Everything right now in our world feels like it gets polarized and politicized. I get it. And I get that this has elements of that too, but we have to be careful about that and try not to make this a partisan issue, and frankly talk about it in a way that that can build the widest coalition. Because I'll tell you that people in my district, Democrats and Republicans, they hate big money in politics. They can't stand the corruption and the erosions to our systems of democracy. So this is very much a bipartisan, if not nonpartisan issue in terms of what it is that we need to protect. Even as mentioned, right now the money advantage when it comes to dark money, as that graph was saying, was actually that there's higher spending for Democrats right now than Republicans. But even though my party, I guess, technically has the advantage in terms of the money, I will definitively tell you that any day, any time, I will support getting rid of that and be able to restrict that dark money in our politics, even if it is right now giving my party an advantage, because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And so I just can't emphasize this enough, that this should not be something that is seen as which side is it helping more or elements of that. This is really just trying to make sure that we're prioritizing the health of our democracy and recognizing that this affects every other aspect of our democracy. This affects my ability to work on any issue that you can think of and imagine. Literally, any issue you can think of, any topic or any policy that you can dream of, I can assure you that this has an impact on that in some way. And that's why this is so fundamental. And that's why I think that this is something we need to prioritize going forward. So look, I'll wrap it up there, and I look forward to the conversation. But I again, grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you.
Thank you so much, Andy. And actually, what I wanted to do, and many of, we have about 50%, I'm not exactly sure who exactly is attending, but in terms of registrations, about 50% were from inside the district and about 50% outside. Either the rest of them mostly in New Jersey, but actually from around the country. We have, I believe, I know we have Virginia, Minnesota, Texas. I recognize some of my other American Promise chapter leaders from around the nation. And some of them may not be aware that you have just recently been in the news because of the donation of your suit to the Smithsonian. And I clipped something that I found very inspiring that you put in your letter about the donation of that suit. And you talked about, I'm just gonna quote, you said, "The Smithsonian is entrusted to help tell the story of America. Isn't it? It is not always a pretty story, but it is an unfinished story with the persistent hope that it will improve and that we can repair our faults. More importantly, it is our story. It is shared truth binding us as one. Patriotism isn't to think we are infallible. It is to know we make mistakes, but to love our nation and one another with care enough to fix the injustices that remain." And I look at this, I thought, that is so appropriate to this issue. This was a mistake. This was a mistaken Supreme Court, a series of Supreme Court decisions that enable the system of influence so that many of the issues that need to be solved are not solved. They're not given the attention that benefits the public welfare for all the reasons that you just mentioned. So I find it inspiring, and I thought it was very appropriate to our discussion. So I just want to remind everybody, please put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those after we go through some questions with Andy now. So you pretty much, you touched on this in your comments, Andy. I wanted to ask, how does campaign fundraising and the time and effort that it takes affect the time you have to do the work of representing constituents, both in meeting with constituents and in working with colleagues to legislate?
Yeah, so you're right. I did address some of that in terms of the commitments per day and also the kind of people that run for Congress in these elected office. But let me give another element of it, which is that it becomes this persistent transaction, just on people's minds, literally in our day-to-day work, when money is just an element of normalcy on the Hill. And I just think that that's such a problem. When people will literally think about whether or not that group supported or things of that nature, as they're kind of thinking through, like, it's just absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And, I just find that it adds just this layer of, this layer that just further polarizes the system that we already have. And I can see it just in my day-to-day work, just in terms of what issues rise up. So one of the biggest things that anyone can do in our democracy is about agenda setting. You are trying to do that right now with this important issue. And I try to do that. I raise up issues that are priorities for me and my district. But others can short circuit that by just pumping a lot of money into the system. And I can see how it gets reflected into the agenda setting in DC, what bills come to the top of the pile, what issues come to the top of people's minds, what meetings happen to get scheduled at last minute. And I think that's where I see so much of the problem, is because who doesn't have that kind of ability to pump money in? The average American person, the average American family, the average folks that are looking out for us. And so I try to think through, well, if all these corporations and the big money, if they got their lobbyists, they got their special interests, who's looking out for the regular folks? That's supposed to be me. That's supposed to be representatives. That's supposed to be my colleagues. But when sometimes folks spend more time talking to special interests and the lobbyists than they do their own constituents and the people, we see the problem. We see the conundrum that we're experiencing here. And I see that, as I said, on a daily basis. I'm actually, I have to say, being in Congress now, 2.5 years that I've been in, I'm actually more alarmed about this than I was before I came into Congress, because I see it with my own eyes how detrimental this is for our system and how dangerous it can be. It's even worse of a problem than I imagined, being someone who didn't operate on Capitol Hill before. Mm-hmm. So I don't mean to scare you all, but I just want you to know that the cause you're fighting for is just, and what you're trying to do is important. And I want you to know that, this is one of those, linchpin issues. It is a bottleneck of our democracy and something that we very much need to tackle.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, as a retired physician, there were so many things, climate change and the opioid crisis and so many things that I was concerned about, but everything I looked at, it was money and politics underneath it that was holding up a common sense solution. And that's what inspired me. And I know, many of our American Promise volunteers feel that way, whether they came to American Promise after working on climate, maybe with the Citizens Climate Lobby or Results or some other advocacy organization, and just felt like I'm banging my head against the wall because the money that's being spent against our issues just keeping us from getting traction and getting something actually done in Congress. So I appreciate that. Besides, obviously, the drug pricing issue with that example that I gave of the dark money ad, are there other key, do you think there's 2 or 3 key issues that affect New Jersey 3rd District that you see most influenced? I know they all are, but would you say there's 1 or 2 that are most influenced by money and politics?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the point that you mentioned, the drug pricing, that's one that I experienced a lot. In fact, I actually just introduced a bill the other day that's trying to set an out-of-pocket cap for seniors when it comes to prescription drugs. I think something that pretty much all of us can understand is probably important for people that are, many of them on fixed incomes. Many of them have to take multiple different prescription drugs, pay thousands of dollars a year. Some sort of fixed out-of-pocket makes sense. But I can tell you how hard even something like that seems like, who's going to have a problem with that when it comes to helping our seniors? But people do, and a lot of special interests do. When it comes to what is the reason why we do not have universal background checks for gun safety? What is the reason that we do not have the kind of investment in clean energy that we need to be having? A lot of that comes back to these issues, and it's not just about dark money and special interests being able to agenda set. It's not just about dark money and special interests being able to push forward the candidates that they want. They also make it such that folks are hesitant to touch certain issues for fear of getting attacked, for fear of being targeted in that way. So I see it not only in terms of like agenda setting, but also kind of like, I don't know the right phrase, but like agenda deterring, or something that prevents certain things from rising up because people get scared to take it on because they know the heat that they're going to take, because of that. And again, I just find that to be, so scary, on these issues that are of such magnitude and importance. And it also just, just at a personal level, it confuses me why people want this job so bad that they're willing to twist themselves in pretzels and do all this kind of stuff if ultimately they're going to be just, unmoored from their convictions and just, choosing the path of least resistance and just doing what, the big money, pressures them to do. I just find that to be, it's sad. It's sad that it's kind of gotten to that point where, where we're at in terms of how much influence it has. But again, just on so many different issues, it's very disturbing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And the last question, one other question that I prepared ahead, and then I think we have some in the chat. So we found it important in our lobby meetings back in May. We had our National Citizen Leadership Conference, and we held lobby meetings with, as I said to you before, 9 out of the 12 House delegation to Congress from New Jersey, and the stabs of both senators. And not in the senators, but in some of the House districts, the House staff, we had to emphasize, we're not here talking about HR 1. HR 1 is the For the People Act. There are a lot of democracy reform issues, voting rights, ethics reform, and it does address dark money, about exposing the sources of dark money. But we weren't there to talk to them about that. We were there to talk to them about the constitutional amendment. And I wanted to just highlight and see what you would have to say about HR 1 is important. It's important to know where the dark money is coming from. Like looking at that ad that they ran against you with HR 3, you wouldn't know there was pharmaceutical money behind that. It said American Action Network. It sounds like apple pie, it sounds like something that, oh, well, American Action Network, I must be in favor of what they want. You don't know where the money's coming from, and you don't know what their agenda are with the dark money. So exposing that's great, and that's what HR 1 would do. But as I put in my presentation for the constitutional amendment, it's the permanent reduction in the amount of money, so that the avalanche, that's not the 300 individuals donating 90% of the money and drowning out the voices of 330 million individuals. Can you comment on that difference between the permanent solution in the constitutional amendment versus the legislation in HR 1?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, this is a huge problem that we see in the system right now. And right now, because of the Citizens United decision, there are limitations to what we can change, when it comes to dark money in our politics. So a lot of it that we focus on is about shining a light on. For instance, when we know that, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's like only like 11 individuals are responsible, I think, for about 20 to 25% of all dark money that has been pumped into our system over the last decade. Like, out of the billions of dollars that have gone into dark money, 11 people are responsible for a huge chunk of that. And that just shows you the problems that are out there and why it is that we need to know who they are and know who others are that are involved in that. That's a big problem. So that's something that, through HR 1 and other efforts, we can try to get at. But what the amendment that you're all engaged in is trying to do is not just shine a light on these 11 people and other people that are doing this, but it's really trying to bring that money down. Just realize not just like how crazy it is that 11 individuals have spent billions of dollars to influence our election. It's about saying that 11 people should not be able to pump billions of dollars and influence our election at the expense of so many other Americans that do not have that kind of resource. And so that is the fundamental difference here. And what it is that we're not able to do through Congress right now without an amendment like this.
Yeah, we talk about it being political equality, one voice, one vote. Money is not speech. And when you equate it to speech, then you negate the value of the vote that the individual has. And it's interesting. I would have to say, in the last 5 years, I've talked to a lot of people who said, they're moderate means, and that they have some money that they can do donations with, and they have looked at how much money was being put in, because it's not limited at this point, and they feel like, gosh, I better donate, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to maybe get some of the candidates in place that I want to represent me, that are going to do what's in my best interest and the interest of the public. So,
well,
Jen,
it's not just about the people too. It's about corporations and other special interests being able to do that as well. Like just like things without heartbeats are able to spend more money than human beings and have that kind of capacity. That is that has taken that kind of one person, one vote kind of to the next level, just kind of taking it out of just the citizen arena and now putting into place other actors and forces that now are able to have a greater influence than human beings. And I think that that's just a very dangerous place to be.
that doesn't sound like a democracy to me. Does it to you? That's the problem, right? So I think it looks like we have some questions. Joan, did you pick out some things from the chat that?
Yes, I did. One
Excuse
really quick
me,
question.
one second, Joan. So what we're going to do, because there's so many people, we're going to read the question out of the chat rather than try to transition back and forth between people, stating their question.
Right. And in some cases, I'm combining a few questions into
Great.
One really quick question someone asked toward the beginning, Mario, is the slides that you put out there, if they wanted to get copies of them, can they?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Mario, I'm going to give our email addresses on our registration and everything. If you email me and remind me, I can share those with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Several people asked questions about saying, hey, the public supports this. Why are we having such difficulty getting it through Congress? And that sort of leads us to the fact that American Promise being a nonpartisan organization, and we want to reach across the aisle, Democrats and Republicans and independents. What are the, do you feel that, hold on one second. Do you feel that it's important for you in your job to develop relationships with Republicans that will help forward not only lots of bipartisan or cross-partisan efforts, but this particular effort? And that was asked in a yes or no way, but sort of how do you think that can be addressed? What are some ways that can be addressed?
No, I mean, look, the work that you all are doing is incredibly important too. And I commend the way that you're going about it too, in terms of engaging in this in a nonpartisan, bipartisan type way. I mean, being able to engage with folks like Congressman Katko, a Republican from New York, and showcasing that this is something that he can support, that this should be a value across the board. That's important. And because, look, the constitutional amendment is the hardest route in terms of change. In terms of there's a lot of hurdles. We can't mince words here. It's tough. It's intentionally tough because the Constitution is our founding document. It is our guiding principle as a nation. So the bar should be high in terms of what it takes to amend it. But the fact that there is a process in place to amend it shows that our founding fathers understood that changes might need to be made and that things could be different. And now, as we were talking about before, as we're approaching the 250th anniversary of our nation looks very different than it did over 200 years ago. So that kind of spirit is what we need to be engaged in. And I will certainly do my part in terms of engaging my colleagues, both on the Democrat and the Republican side. I think many of you will come to see the way that I try to operate and the way I try to engage is that, for me, my job is to try to help build coalitions and build coalitions of majorities, whether that's a simple majority or a 2/3 majority, which is what is needed for this. It's to build majorities to try to get that across the board. And right now, neither party has a majority of 2/3 in the House. So anything we need to do at that magnitude would absolutely require bipartisanship. This is out of both design and necessity. Requires us to be quite strategic about this and to try to ensure that this doesn't look like or come across in a partisan way, because it shouldn't. Because Americans across all political spectrums are very much in support of this.
Yes, and I think I should mention, that there are various forms of wording of the amendment, but that's an open issue now because the final wording of the amendment, we hope to reach that through a bipartisan effort.
Yeah.
So, okay, another question that came in.
Hold on for a second. I got interrupted by a 4-year-old. Hold on.
Someone has asked, some people are talking about what can we do for state action at a state level. That was asked generally by Walter, but someone also asked specifically, for example, can states begin by capping all campaign funding within states? I'm not sure whether that should be a combination of Marie and Andy addressing or what.
So
yeah, so sorry for almost had a 4-year-old kind of Zoom bomb this discussion. He is happy that
we're happy to have him.
he just turned 4 yesterday, so he was.
And happy birthday to you, Andy. Is that
yes, yeah.
All right, happy birthday.
Yeah, I'm glad my birthday's a day before his, so it's not totally overshadowed by him for the rest of my life. But he's 4 and all the more bold to just kind of pop in here. But look, there are some tools at the state level as well, but that they can only handle state level elections and local elections. We are not able to address the federal side of things through those means. So, we require, the federal type of effort to be able to do that. And that's a lot of what we're talking about, in terms of what Marie was showing in those slides, the vast majority of that kind of money in our politics was trying to address the presidential election and the majorities in the Senate and the House. So there are tools, and we should be looking at those to try to see what we can do. And there have been some interesting steps that different municipalities and states and cities have done, but it's not going to scratch the surface of the magnitude of the problem that we're facing, which is why it's so important for us to push on this level too.
The amendment will set some basic framework for what the states can decide for themselves about certain things, certainly about their own state funding of elections and whether they choose to use vouchers or public financing or what other means they can. But the key is that 24 states had campaign finance laws that were overturned by Citizens United.
Right.
So it took away those tools from the states in being able to limit money as they saw fit, which is not right. But I know
the other thing I want to say, though, that this process for an amendment does require the states to get engaged too, in the ratification process. So it is important to build this up in terms of local and state
resolution
support and constituency as well. So yes, focus on federal legislators as well, but not at the expense of not, you also, and then you all are doing this too. And I see what you're doing in New Jersey
State
and elsewhere,
resolutions.
but that's important. So just let's keep at that too.
So for those New Jersey attendees of our event today, I was surprised. I wasn't aware of it. It hadn't come across my radar at all. But when I got involved in this in 2017, I found out that New Jersey had passed a non-binding resolution calling on Congress to support a constitutional amendment to limit spending in elections back in 2012. So we have a non-binding resolution of our state, our state legislature. One of the things, if what American Promise is doing right now, what we kind of have this plan that we're hoping that through maybe some changed amendment language and being able to bring on some Republicans, that maybe we can get this to the point where we could get it through Congress by 2024. And then it seems like most amendments that are successful are brought through the states and get to the 38 states within 2 years. So at the same time, we are working to build education among the public and among state legislators. And one of the things we'll probably do here in New Jersey, starting in the next year or so, is to maybe start doing non-binding, resolutions in townships, counties, and possibly bring the state legislature back to that point to be ready to ratify, so that when it gets through Congress, first of all, that helps to convince the Congress people that this is something my state really wants to do. And second of all, it gets us ready to ratify for when it comes back from Congress. So Andy, do you have a couple more minutes to spend with us? I know it's getting close to that time. You had.
Yeah, if we can start to wrap up, and I got a couple of minutes, but why don't we start to wrap up a little bit?
So Joan, if we have one more good question.
Well, actually, several people asked about what they can do to get involved in American Promise. I know you're going to address that.
Address that, right?
And Nancy asked about should state advocates, so it's difficult to pass a constitutional amendment, should state advocates go through the Constitutional Convention route?
Marie, I don't know if you've thought about that.
Well, I'll comment on it. There's another group called Wolfpack, and they are convinced that the way to get this amendment through is through state constitutional conventions, because it's never been done before. And their argument actually is not necessarily that it would be done through state constitutional convention, but if enough states call for that, Congress will have to act, because Congress won't want to let go of it. Like, I think, you had said, Andy, that, a lot of the Congress people feel like, well, I'm benefiting from this right now. That's how I'm in power. So maybe I don't really want to rock the boat. This got me where I am right now. So the threat of a state constitutional convention, Wolfpack feels like that could be a tool in the toolbox to help Congress to act. There aren't rules for it. It is in the Constitution. There aren't rules for it. So there's a lot of comments on both sides, like, oh, it could be good, or oh, there's worries about runaway convention and other issues being introduced, which the constitutional scholars say no, that couldn't happen. But that would be my comment and what I know about constitutional conventions. If that's the way that it really could get done, American Promise would work for that, but we don't see that happening. We see the traditional congressional route being probably the way it'll happen. And every generation passes amendments. We're due. 1970s were the last slew of constitutional amendments that went through. And the other thing I forgot to mention earlier is the American Academy of Arts and Sciences ran a 2-year study. They did 50 focus groups around the country with all demographics. And they asked what's wrong with our democracy and what should we do? And they came back together and they looked at this. There were constitutional scholars, there were business scholars, there were all kinds of leaders. And they came up with a report that was published last June, in fact, 2020, called Our Common Purpose. And they recommended 31 democracy reforms. The one constitutional amendment that they recommended was this work that we're doing to limit political donations and spending in politics. They talked about ranked choice voting and many other things. And if you're interested, You can look up at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Our Common Purpose. It's really a fascinating thing. And now there's some other resources that they're putting to work on these democracy reforms. So that's the story there. So I think
Marie, several people have said, have asked, I'm very heartened to hear that several people have asked, what are some small steps that we can do? How can we get involved in American Promise?
great.
And
So I think maybe
there have been links put in the chat regarding
Yeah.
it, but I thought maybe you'd want to speak to it.
yes, I am going to do that. That's unless Andy, do you have a final comment before we tell people how they can get involved?
No, look, I'm just grateful. We're going to stay in touch. This is an ongoing partnership and dialogue between us. Know that I'm somebody that's focused on this and very much wants to champion these issues. So I'm glad that we are able to connect in and try to push that forward. So anything I can do from my office, you keep me posted, but I'm just very supportive of your engagement. I'm grateful for all of you understanding the intricacies of the system and why this is such a critically important and powerful avenue for which we can try to advocate for the change that we want to see in our country. So just thank you. Keep it up, please. Stay engaged.
Thank you. And well, we really appreciate your support and same back at you. You know, we'll be in touch. We'll be working with you for sure. But the two things, there's a citizen pledge that the link has been put in the chat. It's americanpromise.net/join us. And that puts your name on our list of supporters, and you have the option to opt into our the national newsletter or not. And in addition, there is an introduction to American Promise web and Zoom meeting that's going to be on Wednesday night, the 28th of July. And you are welcome to join that. It's basically talking in more depth about what I presented at the beginning of this session, and getting into some of the more of the background, some more of the mechanics, and also what you can do, whether it be join a local chapter or write a letter to the editor or write a letter to your congressperson, which you can always do. That's always helpful. And some other things. We have a business network. We have a healthcare providers network, which I'm involved with. And so there's
all the training and the trainings that people can get.
Oh yeah, and we have a series of trainings, advocacy trainings that you can get involved with too. So
you how to become an effective advocate in terms of writing letters to the editor or having events, and it's really dynamic training.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming, and thanks so much to you, Andy, and to your Chief of Staff, Amy Pfeiffer, for coordinating this. And I want to say have a wonderful evening, everybody. Can we all unmute and say
thank
you?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Congressman.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday to your son.
Thank
Thank you.
you, everybody.